Okay, so I'm just going to make a tutorial on what we discussed in class. That way you can pause it and then play it back at your own speed. Okay, so here's my logo. You can see that I have a folder created for each of our lessons. In there, I'm just going to simply right-click on it and say Open with Adobe Illustrator. You'll see that it's an EPS format. Most of the logos that you get from a client will be in a .eps format, and Adobe likes to work with them with an AI Illustrator or Photoshop. That way you can read it as a layered file. Okay, so here is my logo opened up in Illustrator. So up here at the tab, you'll see Layers tab. If it's not selected, come up to Window and check off Layers. So here I'm simply going to twirl open that layer, and I can see all the elements of my logo. I can open everything up and see how the creator of this logo kind of built this in different elements, but they're all under one layer. So what I want to do is I want to create separate layers for everything that I want to animate. So we discussed making this animation here on the radio waves. So I'm going to just create a new layer and separate that out. Create a new layer using this icon here, and new layer. Oh, no, that's showing up correctly. I'm going to title this dot. And then I'm going to come over here to the dot, and I always like to hide and unhide each layer as I move it to make sure that I'm working on the correct one. So there's my first layer. And come up again, new layer, and I'm going to call this small wave. And I want the smallest wave to go in there, which is that one. And when I'm dragging it, I'm clicking on this portion of it, and that helps me move it easier. So a new layer, let's call this medium wave. That one, so move that up. Large wave. Okay, so we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 layers that we created, and that's our original layer. So now I want to put TV in its own layer. So I can simply just create a layer, name it TV, and I'm going to move everything in this group, right? So if I hide it, it's all coming in. I don't really want to separate the T and the V. I want to animate that as one group. So I'm going to move that group into my TV layer. All right, and I think that is it. Here, this is the UIW layer, so I'm just going to click on it and rename that UIW. And I'm going to save this, File, Save As. And we don't want to just do save because that'll save it as an EPS. We want to save it as an Illustrator file. Save. It'll give you this menu. Just make sure that it's checked off as Create PDF Compatible File, and then hit OK. Perfect. So we're done with Illustrator for now. I'm just going to minimize that. Okay, so we're in After Effects now. I simply just opened it. I'm going to create a new composition. And here I'm going to title it Logo, and making sure that it's 1920 by 1080. I'm going to change this to 29.97 as if we're working with the client for television. Television runs on 30 frames per second, so 29.97. And I'm just going to use 10 seconds as my duration. And hit OK. And here we are. So now we're ready to import our Illustrator file. So come up to File, Import, File. It's really important here when we go to select it that we're selecting, first of all, the AI file, and then that we're coming down here and changing instead of importing it as footage, because footage will just simply collapse all of those layers into one file and you won't have access to individual layers. Composition retained layer sizes will bring it in as a composition, but it will stack every element or every layer upon itself. So we want to select composition only. All right, so we have our layers imported. They come in imported in a folder. So I'm going to open that up and I'm going to select all of them. There's a couple of ways you can do this. You can just draw a rectangle around the layers that you want to select, or you can select the first one, hit down your shift key and hold it, and then select the last layer, and it'll select everything in that folder. Then I'm just going to drag it down to my timeline. All right, before I go any further, I'm going to save. I haven't really saved it. You can see it says an untitled project, so I want to save it as a logo project in my logo folder, right? Because we're keeping everything organized. So I'll call this logo. There we go. All right, then what I like to do here is I want to put these all in an order that kind of makes sense to me. So for me, I like UIW to be at the top, and then I'm going to animate my waves, starting with the dot, then the small one, and then the medium wave, and then the large wave, and then finally my TV layer. You don't have to necessarily follow it in this order, but order it in a way that makes sense to you, what's going to work for you. Okay, so we said that we wanted this radio wave to kind of grow out and as if it's broadcasting a signal. So I'm going to move my playhead to about maybe half a second here and start my animation. So we'll start with the dot, and there's a couple of ways you can move a layer within After Effects. You can simply highlight the layer and then come over here to the timeline and drag it to the right or to the left. And when you drag it, you can see the beginning of it, and you can shorten it or trim the beginning of it. You can also trim the end just by dragging it, right? So you can move these around anywhere you want. Another way to do it is, let me kind of put this back. If you're at the point where you want that layer to be trimmed, the shortcut key is Option and the open bracket, and it'll trim the beginning portion of it. So that looks good. I'm going to move my playhead to about 1 second now and go to my next layer and do the same thing, Option, open bracket, and then just kind of keep going here every 15 frames. Make sure that you select the layer before you hit the shortcut key. And then one more time on my large wave, Option and open bracket. So I'm going to play that and see what it looks like. Yeah, that looks good. And maybe I stop it at about 3.5 seconds here. So I want to trim the ending of every one of these layers. So the shortcut would be Option, and this time instead of using the open bracket, I'm going to use a close bracket, and it'll trim the end of that layer. It's a really neat shortcut. Okay, so I've done that. I'm going to do Command S to save. Then the easiest way to work with these now, because I like that animation, but I wanted to start over again, like maybe at 4.5 seconds, and then just continue all the way through. So instead of copying this and making this composition very complicated with many, many layers, I'm going to put these layers into its own separate composition. So I'm going to select the first layer, hold down my Shift key, and select the last layer. Now they're all selected, 1, 2, 3, 4 layers. From here, I can do it one of two ways. I can right-click and select Pre-Compose, or I can come up to Layer and select Pre-Compose, either way. So we're going to pre-compose these. I'm going to call this radio waves, or TV waves actually. All right. So now we have it all in one composition. If we want to go back into that composition and add to it, I simply just need to double click on that icon and it opens up. All right, so here we are. So now I want that to maybe start again at about 4 seconds. So I'm going to duplicate every one of these layers and I'm going to start them at 4 seconds, and then I'm going to duplicate them again and start them again over about 8 seconds or so. So again, to duplicate, you can just select all of them by drawing a rectangle around the layers, or you can select the first one, hold down your Shift key and select the last layer. From here, we're going to do Command D, as in duplicate, or we can also come up to Edit and Duplicate. Okay, so now it goes, it put every one of those into its own layer right underneath it. So I'm simply going to, with the layers selected, every other layer selected, I'm going to just hold my mouse down and drag down. And now I have them all pretty much all stacked together. So they're still selected. I'm going to just drag this to about 4 seconds. So I have my first animation, it goes off and then it comes up again. Good. So I'm going to do it one more time, maybe about 7 and 15 frames, so 7.5 seconds here. They're already selected. All I need to do is hit Command D to duplicate them. They're duplicated and selected. While they're still selected, I'm just going to hold down my mouse button and drag them down. And they're still selected, so I'm just going to move them over, about right there. So now I have this animation going all the way to 10 seconds. All right, so my pre-comp is done. I'm going to exit out of that tab, so I'm just going to close the tab. If I wanted to go back into it, I can simply just double click here. All right, let's do Command S. Okay, so now we want to animate the TV portion of the logo, right? We want that to come in animated. So last class on Tuesday, we looked at animation presets, right? So we went in here and we specifically worked with the ones in the transition folder under movement. So I would definitely go in there and experiment with some of these and see if you like it, right? So we played with, I think, the slide straight. So let me just kind of review that with you. I'm going to take that effect and drop it down to the layer, the TV layer. And remember, wherever your playhead is where your animation will start when you're dragging and dropping here. As soon as you add the animation, the effects control will open up here on your left. You can also open up the layer itself down here by twirling open on those arrows and seeing the same effects down here. So either way, I'm at 100%. Always try to have your magnification where you can see the outside portion of your composition. So we can see now that the TV didn't even go off the frame. It's not even halfway off the frame. The animation preset starts right there and it ends there. So that's an issue that we have with some of the presets. So in order to fix that, I'm going to animate my anchor point. I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger. Oops, sorry. I'm going to close that out. All right, so in this case where the animation starts here and I don't want to see it until it animates all the way in, I'm going to animate the anchor point. So over here, anything that you see that's in blue, we can definitely change, right? We can change the transition complete, anything that's in here, we can add another value to it and change that property. But if something is in red, that means it's tied to another property. So like this position point is tied to something else. If I open it up, by clicking on that arrow, it'll reveal an expression. An expression is simply a little bit of script that tells After Effects what to do with that layer or with that property. We're going to get into writing some simple expressions later in the semester. For now, I don't want to mess with this, so I'm just going to close that out. But just know that if it's in red, try not to animate that. Instead, we're going to animate the anchor point. The way to animate an anchor point is to first start at the end of your animation. I'm going to zoom in. And I want my animation to end there, right? So the TV slides in and stops there. Make sure you're frame accurate. So it's exactly at that frame. I am going to add a keyframe on anchor point at the end point of the animation, where it ends. So I will simply just click on the stopwatch, and there's my end keyframe. And I'm going to go backwards in time to the beginning there. I can go right there to that to line it up with that same frame. And here's where I want the first keyframe to be, but I'm going to animate the anchor so that it goes off screen. So on these properties, this is your X value. The X value controls motion horizontally, and then the Y factor controls motion vertically. So I'm going to animate the X factor because I want it to move a horizontal, right? So I'm just going to move it all the way out of the frame. So here is my first keyframe, starting keyframe, and here's my ending keyframe. So if I play it back, it comes in from outside the frame completely. So if you're using transition movements under presets and you're not able to animate a certain property, usually the position, animate instead the anchor point. Okay, so I'm just going to delete that effect altogether. I'm going to select Effect and hit Delete. I'll do Command S here. So the animation that I want to apply is something called Bad TV. And I've kind of played around with these. I want to use the number 3. So I'm going to move my playhead to the very beginning because I want the animation to go from the very beginning and on. So I'm going to drag that effect down to my layer, my TV layer, and let it go. And then up here, I'll see the effects control with every property in here. So I want to explain this a little bit deeper. When you apply a preset animation, it's really multiple effects made up into one animation. So this Bad TV effect is really a wave warp effect, color balance effect, the noise effect, and the Venetian blind effect. So if you wanted to create this Bad TV all on your own manually, you would use all of these effects, and you can really control how it responds. So for instance, if let me close this out, and I'm just going to demonstrate. I'm going to delete that and start again. I'm going to demonstrate. I'm going to take the TV layer, and I'm going to create a new composition. You don't have to do this. I just want to show you something. I don't care too much about the size. I'm going to go to 100% so you can see. And I just want to show you, if I type up here Venetian blind, I can see, first of all, 2 Venetian blind effects. one Venetian blind effect is under animation preset. I don't want to use that because I don't have that much control over it. It's already pre-made. Here is a transition to use manually. So I'm just going to drag that down to my layer and let it go. And then you'll see up here, it's been applied. I can also open up the layer under effects and you can see the Venetian blinds. All right, so essentially what we're working with is 1, 2, 3, 4 properties under Venetian blinds. The first one, transition complete, means how much of the effect do you want to apply? And then do you want to animate it over time? So if I move that to about 20%, I'll see some of the Venetian blinds coming in. I can also animate the direction. So right now they're vertical Venetian blinds, but I can make them diagonal and I can make them horizontal, or I can just, kind of play with it. I can even animate this over time, right? You can also play with the width. So I can make these wider blinds or thinner blinds, and I can feather them as well. So I'm going to delete that and go back to my main composition. So you can see that's really, in essence, what we're working with in the animation preset. So if I click on that and open it up here, we can see that the preset applied a 15% completion on it. The direction is coming in horizontally at 90 degrees. It has a width of 5 and a feather of 1 pixel. All right, and simply same thing with any one of these, right? The wave warp. We can just wave warp. The height is in red, so we're not going to really mess with that because that's an expression. We can play with the width, the direction, the wave speed, pinning, phasing, anti-aliasing. The color balance is just working on saturation. So it just desaturated the layer by 50%. And then it added more noise. Here we have a wave type in the noise frame, but we added even more noise with that. So, if you wanted to experiment and build the animation yourself, you can just add these 4 layers or effects to your layer and then animate them and adjust them however you want. Okay, so basically I'm just going to let that animation play out, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit on my timeline. Yeah, and so it just kind of goes back and forth. And what I'm thinking is right about there, I want the animation to stop and I want it to go back to the normal logo that says TV. So I'm going to zoom in just so you can see. So about right there, I want the animation to stop and I want it to go back to the default logo. So I'm going to trim this layer from the back. So I'm going to hold down my Option key and click on the closed arrow. And it's trimmed. And I'm kind of done with this. I'm just going to close that down. Now I want to duplicate this layer, Command D, and then move that so that as soon as this layer ends, I want this layer to start. And I'm going to zoom in just to make sure I don't want to overlap them. I just want one to end, one to start. And then when this one starts, I don't want it to have the effect. So I'm going to control that open and delete the effect on it. So now if I play it back, yeah, it kind of stops and then it goes to the regular TV. So I'm just simply going to move this so that it covers the entire 10 seconds. There we go. All right, Command S to save. Okay, so just to review, we added a preset animation called Bad TV. Number 3, we added it to the TV layer, and then we trimmed about 6 seconds worth at the end. We duplicated that layer and deleted the effect out of this layer so that there's no effect here, but the effect just happens on the first 4 seconds. And so kind of looks like it just morphs into the regular logo. So now let's try adding some animation to UIW TV as a whole. If we were to do that, and I think the one that I experimented with in class was called Light Sweep, which is a really, it's a nice effect that a lot of people use on logos. So I'm just going to type in Light Sweep, and that is my effect. So what I want to do is I want this light to kind of sweep across the entire logo. But right now I can't do that because everything is in layers and the effects only apply to one layer at a time. So if I were to drop it down on my UIW and then animate the center point, you can see as I move it, it's only applying to UIW and not the little radio wave, TV waves and the TV. So I'm going to Command Z. So I'm going to apply an adjustment layer to that. It's found under Layer, New, Adjustment Layer. Basically, an adjustment layer is an invisible layer, and anything you add to the adjustment layer will affect any layer beneath it. So I'm going to click on that, and you really can't see anything because we haven't done anything to it yet. But now if I were to add that light sweep effect to the adjustment layer, you can see as I kind of move my center point, that light sweep is happening over the entire logo, not just one portion of it. So I think that's what I want to do then. I want to add a light sweep animation where the light maybe starts at one corner and sweeps through to the other corner. And let's see, so let's play this back and decide where we want the light sweep to start. Maybe we do it at the end. Maybe we start at about 6 seconds and we do a light sweep for, I don't know, 2 seconds or so. Let me zoom out a bit so we can see the whole timeline. And let's just play with that. Okay, so I want the animation to start here. There's no keyframes yet, right? Because it's not a preset animation. It is just an effect. You see there's nothing, there's not a folder called animation preset. It's just found in generate. So if I just come out, here's my animation preset. But if I go to generate and scroll down, it is right here, CC Light Sweep. All right, so this effect didn't add any kind of keyframes, right? It just added it to the entire adjustment layer because nothing is being animated. We animate it manually. So again, I wanted to start at about 6 seconds, and I'm animating the center point. I can also tell it what direction to go. I can animate the direction as well. But to me, I kind of want it like as a diagonal light. I can also adjust the sweep intensity, like if I wanted it brighter, I could definitely do that. If I wanted the width of the sweep to be wider, I can adjust it there. And the intensity of the edge. So all of these properties you can adjust and you can animate. All right, so let's start where we're going to animate the center point, because this is in relationship to the position of the light sweep. So we're going to start with it off the frame and add a keyframe there. We're going to move the playhead, I don't know, until about 9 seconds, and then animate the light across until it goes completely off. And After Effects adds our second keyframe. I'm going to play that back. And there's our light. So that's another popular effect when dealing with logos. That's basically it on the light sweep. Again, just applying it to the adjustment layer. The other effect that we looked at in class was under Stylize, and we looked at the glow effect. So this is another popular effect. If I throw it on the adjustment layer, everything kind of glows up, and you can adjust how much glow you want. The radius, the intensity of the glow. You can toggle the animation on and off here, this little effects button. If you click on it, it'll take it away, so you can kind of see what the animation did, how much of the glow do you want. That's way too much. Okay. So you can also add like the radius and make it a little, add a little blur to it as well. I'm just going to do Command Z and maybe do a low intensity. Let me try 1 from there to there. So yeah, so this is another thing that you can kind of go in and play with. So I think that's all that we covered in class so far. So again, when you're selecting your logo, make sure that you're working with a high quality logo that you can take into either Illustrator or Photoshop and break up into separate layers. Then once you do that, kind of be thinking of what movement you want each of those layers to do. You can animate using track mats, which we've discussed. You can animate just kind of with breaking up your layers into segments, as we did with the radio waves, or I don't know why I keep calling it radio waves, television waves here. Actually, they are radio waves scientifically. I think that's why I'm calling it. Anyway, so you can do that, shortening up the layers so that way they kind of pop on and pop off. You can add a light sweep. You can experiment with the different presets on here, or you can experiment with adding some of the effects manually, distorting things. So on Tuesday then, bring in your logo, have some idea of the movement that you want to create, and have a project in After Effects started. And that way we can go into a breakout room and discuss it individually. Okay, see you then.